So that, ladies and gentlemen, is a short course in Ronner. That is a summation of what Christian theology is all about. Did you see the steps? It's got an anthropology, who are we? It's got a doctrine of God as the source and goal. It's got a theology of grace. God is present, communicates self to us. It's got a theology of revelation. That is, that all things can speak to us of God. Oh, it's got a Christology. It's got a sacramentology. It's got a moral outlook, love of God and love of neighbor. And it's got an eschatology. That is a final hope that the longings of the heart will be fulfilled. That is a systematic theology. That is an overview. That's one way to answer, not the only way, one way to answer the question, what does it mean to say we're a Christian? What does it mean to say a Christian means I believe I'm graced and oriented to God. To be a Christian means we believe that the triune God loves us, cares for us, and satisfies us finally. To be a Christian means that we're aware of the presence of the Spirit in everyday life. It means we accept Jesus as the absolute Savior and the definitive and final prophet. All of that, part of what it means to be a Christian. Now there's an ethical demand that goes with that, a moral demand with that theology, and that is to stay alert. It's very Pauline. Stay awake. You got to keep your eyes open. Got to keep your ears open. We got to be alert to what's happening. We can't be sleepwalkers through life because we might miss something the Lord is saying to us. I like to think of this metaphor. The Spirit often whispers. I mean, sometimes the Spirit shouts and says, shape up. No, but often the Spirit whispers, and it's subtle. And if we're too busy, too noisy, we might miss it. And that would be bad. It'd be bad to miss the promptings, the whisperings of the Spirit that come from within. We have to practice to be alert. We've got to cultivate awareness so we don't miss this message that comes from the Spirit within. So that theology bears an ethical, moral demand. Keep your eyes open. Keep your ears attuned. Stay focused. Quiet the mind and heart so we can hear the promptings of the Spirit. Okay, that's sort of my Ronner bit. The tiger spots a man and begins to chase him. And as the tiger gets near, he's saying, what's he going to do? And he sees this cliff, and there's a vine there. So he jumps over the cliff and holding on to the vine. And he's looking down, and down below is a drop, and there's another tiger down there. And at that moment he looks up and he sees two mice, one white and one black, gnawing away at his vine. And at that moment he spots a strawberry growing out of a crag in the rock. And he picks the strawberry, puts it in his mouth, savors it, and says, how sweet it tastes. Well, you really shouldn't explain parables, should you? Parables should just sit there. I told that to a corporate group, and they picked up on it so much they kept a box of strawberries in the office as sort of an ongoing reminder of the great need and possibility of living in the moment and enjoying what's possible at any given time. I have a man in my parish who's dying right now of cancer. They quit giving him treatment and everything. And he's very weak. And where do I see him? At daily Mass. Sort of drags himself there. We have this lecture series going. there he is in the lectures. He's got hospice already, it's not long. He's there at the lectures learning, asking questions, still interested in how he can ready himself, prepare himself, how he's going to improve. It's a man who knows something about living in the moment, taking each day as it's given, trying to make the most out of it. A lot of times we feel that there isn't enough time. That's part of this struggle with time. There's not enough time to do what one wants to do, needs to do. And there's one time, I got the flu. And when I'm sick, I think I'm dying. I need tender, loving care at those moments. It's not a good attitude for a celibate to have. It's a good approach. I need help desperately at these moments, a tender touch and so on. Well, I'm lying there with this flu, and I'm thinking, my heavens, I got 4 appointments this afternoon, this evening. I got an article that's due next week that I was supposed to work on. I got a lecture to give tomorrow. I'm thinking, man, I got this book. I'm looking at this book. I got all this stuff written down I have to do. And I'm there in a anxiety fit. Oh, geez, how do I do? Terrible. And then I remembered a line from a book by John Donne. He regularly teaches at Notre Dame. It's called The Way of All the Earth. It's a tremendous book. And the way I remembered the line was, there's enough time. There's always enough time. In fact, there's always exactly the right amount of time. And while I was laying there close to death, I understood that was true. It came like a flash. I saw it. It's right. That's exactly right. Because it's not written down on some blackboard someplace in the sky that I have to finish this article by Friday. What I am called upon to do is to do the best I can with each moment I'm given. And so with that, I decided to just lie there and be sick. Time to be sick. Thus probably averting a major crisis. Anyway, I seldom can remember that. I use that story periodically in talks to remind myself of it because I can't remember it. It doesn't stay with me. It's not in my guts because I get anxious that I'm not going to finish this lecture. I have dragged out the first part. We might not get finished with this material. All the stuff that I'm supposed to say, and it's going to get to be 20 of, and I'm going to say, well, could I have 5 more minutes to finish this up? No, so I can't remember the essential truth. And yet, for a moment, I knew it was right. We all got enough time. We got the right amount of time. Because all we're called upon to do is do the best we can in each given moment. It's all. It's all we have to do. It's sort of that sense, what is it, at the beginning of Cardinal Newman's poem, The Pillar of the Cloud. It's often called Lead Kindly Light. No, the line says, I do not ask to see the distant scene, one step enough for me. It's got that feeling to me of Newman, understanding just one step. That's all. It's all needed, the one step that's possible at this moment. That's one way to think of the growth in the spiritual life. That we're often not called upon to make a quantum leap. What we're asked to do is to take the one next step that's possible. So I might be sitting there talking to a couple who is living together and intending to get married, thus defying the odds. You realize that they are almost 3 times more likely to get divorced than if a couple not living together? So there I'm sitting there talking to this people and in this situation. And I have to figure out what's the one step I could try to get them to take if a quantum leap is not possible. I might be listening and I see, boy, is he demanding and controlling, and he interrupted her 3 times while we're having this conversation. And so maybe the one thing that I bring to their attention is that a pattern? Does that happen regularly? And what might that say about this relationship? How much domination, how much control is it work? In other words, maybe the most I can do, as Newman said, is one step to get them thinking about the dynamics of their relationship. And when it's not possible to say, why don't you two get on the better side of these odds? No, it's an art. Spiritual growth for ourselves and others is an art. All these stories are meant to cluster around this idea of living in the moment, mining the riches of the present time, trying to be focused. In the world of sports, we say that. Michael Jordan gets in a zone. And to say that, it doesn't happen all the time, but he's in a zone, and it just all flows. That's part of how we want it to be, those moments, it flows. We don't want morality to be a matter of gritting our teeth. I'm not going to say anything about her. I hate her guts, but I'm not going to say anything. What we want to get is to live in the moment. We want to flow. We want it to be spontaneous. We want it to be able to react the way it seems normal. That's what it means to put on the mind of Christ. Put on the mind of Christ means that we see the world like he sees it. We tend to operate as he would. We tend to have the same kind of compassion and care, solicitude, love that Jesus manifested. That's what we want, is flow, like the athlete's got when he's in a zone. That happened to me once standing over a golf ball. It's a distant memory, never to be repeated. I stood there and actually thought I could hit it. I didn't, but I thought I could hit it. I felt that flow of energy, and then I probably, at the top of my backswing, blocked on it with negative thoughts. Right at the top of the backswing. Negative thoughts. So part of getting the flow, being present, to get rid of those negative thoughts, let the Spirit work through us. It's part of what we're trying to do here, I believe. Now, I want to come at this 2 other ways. I want to tell Diane that I think is going to help her. One is to develop to a higher degree what I call a situational spirituality. Situational spirituality. And what that means is letting life write the agenda for the spiritual life. Let whatever is going on with us be the grist of our prayer. So this is sort of the opposite approach of saying I'm going to get an hour in the morning and do my prayers, and then that will help me out through the rest of the day. That's one approach, and if somebody's good at that in here, terrific. Great. But for people like Diane, that's not working. Remember, she got in 2 days, all of Lent. It's not working for her. Let's reverse it. What's the sense of walking around adding guilt to everything else that's wrong during Lent? Guilt that she only got it in twice. Well, it doesn't make any sense. So let's get rid of the guilt, and let's do it a different way. So I suggest to Diane that what she's got to do is concentrate on prayer related to what's going on in her life. So maybe before she's going to see her daughter on a given afternoon, Diane whispers a prayer to the Lord, asking me, help me to be charitable to her. Help me to be sensitive. Thus attuning herself to what she needs to try to do. So now we begin, there's the principle at stake. Now it's a matter of multiplying those kinds of things, where life moves us to brief kind of prayers. The sun is out, thank you, Lord. I meet someone I haven't seen for a long time, and I allow that to jog my memory, and thank you, Lord, for the good things in the past. So now we got prayer. Life is moving us to prayer. That's what I got to get Diane to do more of. You can do simple things like the person who says, I get to Mass, and by the end of it, if you asked me what it was all about, I really don't know. I don't know the gospel, I don't know the homily or anything else. I'm sort of brain dead through most of it. Well, what I want here is a touchstone moment, like, well, when you stand up for the gospel, let that be a physical reminder, ooh, I got to listen. I missed the first two, but 1 out of 3 isn't bad. I mean, what do you make, about 8 million a year, hitting 333 these days? So we try to get into that kind of flow, so that, or maybe going up to communion, stand up, walking up, a movement. So we try to get something happening. So what am I after here? Multiplying the catalyst. I got one that works for me. A prayer. When someone comes in to see me, get my advice, I listen for about 10 minutes, and being very quick of mind, I got the solution to their problem. God, it's clear, I got it. And then I say a prayer on a good day. A bad day, I forget to say the prayer. But on a good day, I say, Lord, preserve me from my Messiah complex. And when I say that prayer, it has a remarkable effect, pragmatic, clear effect. I keep my mouth shut. If I remember the prayer, I keep my mouth shut, and I listen for a longer period of time, at the end of which I find out that my brilliant insight at the 10-minute mark was all wrong anyway. So, prayer connected with life, that's what I'm after for Diane. Maybe she should pray before going to bed and making love with her husband. Maybe that'd be a good time for her to pray. So that she sees that as part of the way that she meets the Lord. This is not necessarily an obligation. This is love-making that one is involved in. So finding the times to pray like that and connecting it in with real life would really be an important part of all of this. It would be good to get a profile of that. Ask yourself what throughout the day moves you to prayer and what doesn't. Sunny days, I pray. Rainy days, I just get depressed. Now, what is it? Someone criticizes me and I just get hurt. I don't pray. Someone praises me and I remember to say, this is a good prayer for compliments. We get a compliment and we let it come in, leave an affirming residue, and let it go out in a simple prayer. Thank you, Lord. Instead of blocking the compliment and saying, getting embarrassed by it, let it come in, leave the residue of affirmation, and move into this very short prayer. Thank you, Lord. No one's too busy to do that. If we got the principle in mind that life moves us to prayer, then all of life can move us to do other things that are good for us spiritually as well. So lectors here, you read the scriptures, it would be good to read a commentary ahead of time. Or read the scriptures ahead of time and meditate on it. It's connected in with what you got to do. You see what I'm saying? Some of you teach in religious education classes. That's the time to study. If you give me a book to read about Christ, just to read it, I'll remember about 5% of it. But if I have to give a lecture the next day on Christology, and you give me that book, I'm into it. I'm getting it. I'm outlining it. I'm remembering it. It becomes part of me. So, life writes the agenda for the spiritual life, situational spirituality. so that whatever it is could move us to come close to God. You meet a friend you haven't seen for a while, and you could write about it in your journal. You walk up the stairs and feel overly tired. It could be a catalyst for going on a diet or starting an exercise program. I tell you one thing I do, I can ward off tension headaches by doing mantra meditation, like a Jesus prayer, centering prayer. People know that. You know, I turn everything off and hands in lap, feet on floor, eyes closed, breathe through my nostrils. And as I let my breath out, I say in my mind, my Lord and my God. And do that for 15 minutes. Well, I can ward off a tension headache that way. I can do that sitting in an airport or a dentist's office or anytime, any place. I can do that right here. When I do it, I feel my muscles here relax. Well, I mean, is that a reason to pray, to ward off a tension headache? My theory is, why not? Why not? It's life, it's part of it. If it works, use it. Very pragmatic approach. So, that's what I want Diane to do. Okay? The rest of what I want to tell Diane has to do with structured spirituality now. And a number of points that Diane's got to do. Diane has to learn to say no. The pastor calls up and said, Diane, you've been doing such a great job on the parish council. I want you to take charge of the finance committee. And Diane says, Father, no, I can't do that. My spiritual director will get upset. I can't do that. No. Nice, polite no. And she's got to be able to do that without fear of rejection. Her great fear is the pastor won't like her anymore. And she's got to get over that if she's going to say no. Diane needs to care for herself. She has to remember there's 3 loves in the Scriptures. Love of God, love of neighbor, and love of self. Diane's good at the first 2. She's not good at the last one. She has to take care of herself. She has to set aside time for herself. She got to think of her own health, her own needs. I got a too long story. Some women in my parish said what they decided to do was, they had young kids in grade school, and they said, what we're going to do is not get up in the morning of school days, not get out of bed. About 4 of them decided that. And we're just going to stay in bed and let them take care of themselves. Well, it was chaos. I mean, they had the wrong socks on. You know, they're fighting. It was terrible. And they all had the same experience, but they stuck with it. And over a period of time, it worked terrifically. And the kids managed. They were fine. And when they came home from school, they were actually glad to see them. They hadn't seen them yet all day. And they were very open to this. Well, I said, when I heard this, I called my sister up. She had 4 kids. I said, Barb, what did I tell you? See, you don't get up. You stay in bed, and they take care of themselves, and it works great, and you'll like to see them. And my sister said, well, I couldn't do that. I said, what if I could prove to you that it would be more effective? Well, I couldn't do that. My sister would not get Mother of the Year with that approach. It's clear. So, Diane and a lot of other people, we have to learn to take care of ourselves. We have to let the flow come this way sometime. We got to let people love us. We can't be taking care of the whole world all the time. Proper love of self. There was, a number of years ago in my parish, a great peace activist, Charles de Benedetti. In our new church, there's a Charles de Benedetti social justice room. dedicated. We had a big ceremony and everything. A room dedicated to peace and justice, named after this guy. Well, the story is this. He used to come to me for spiritual direction, or so it was said. But I never knew who was directing whom. You know. And we interacted, and we talked. Our favorite story was the agony in the garden. And we both had the same take on it. Jesus' problem wasn't that he was going to die. That wasn't what produced all the anxiety. But the problem was he didn't have the job done yet. He didn't have the kingdom working in right order. Didn't have the disciples properly formed yet, and he's liable to get taken out. That was his problem. So one day I get a call from Chuck's daughter. Said, it's my father. He's in a hospital, just been diagnosed with a brain tumor. Nothing hit me like that except the death of my own father. I went to the hospital to offer prayer and comfort. I got in there, and I couldn't do anything but sob. I couldn't say a word, not a prayer, no comfort, no solace from the pastor. And Chuck put his arm around me and said, Jim, remember the agony in the garden. This was a man at the height of his powers, 44 years old, just received an $80,000 grant to do an oral history of the Vietnam period. He had a manuscript like this of a book on the peace movement. All gone. Jim, remember the agony in the garden. Who ministered to whom? Where was the flow of energy? Diane's got to let the energy flow this way sometimes. It's got to be mutual. And Diane's got to learn to manage her time better. She's got to learn to, you got so much time, you got to manage it. I was once giving a talk in Atlantic City to corporate people. I give talks on time management to corporations. So they called me in, and lunch was at 12, and I was giving this talk then from 1 to 2:30. And so I got there late for lunch, and finally get around, they introduced me, and I'm going. I start at 1, and I'm going, and I'm looking at my watch. My heavens, it's 1:45. I got to compress the material. I'm compressing. I'm getting this time managed. Finally, 2 o'clock, I pull it together. And I said, well, there it is. And the guy who was running things says, Dr. Basic, you have till 2:30, you know. Right, of course. Let's have some questions. Guy raised his hand. He says, are you sure you're an expert on time management? The answer to that question is no. However, I do know theoretically the importance of it. Diane's got to get herself together. She needs a schedule. She's got to prioritize. She's got to find out the time of the day to do the things she should do. She's got to get those in. I made one change in my own life that way after listening to myself talk about time management for years. I used to read in the morning and write at night. I love to read. I hate to write. So all day long I'm going, I got to write that article tonight. It's 10 o'clock at night, and the last appointment, I'm dead tired. I got to write this article. And I thought one day it became clear to me. I'm always telling people, you got to do the important things at your best time. You got to do the hard things at your best time. So I said, aha. In one brilliant move, I began to write in the morning and read at night. Just like that. Brilliant. Took me 8 years of giving that talk before I figured that out. So, the point is to encourage people like Diane. Everybody, I'll bet's got some shift like that. We should do the important things at good times. And we should learn to delegate, let other people do it. I'm over time. Thank you.
This is the conclusion of Side 2. To listen to side 1, fast forward the tape to the end and turn it over.
Well, good afternoon. Well, I always have afterthoughts in terms of when I talk and so on. So I just wanted to say a few things picking up on this morning and then see if we have any questions or comments. I had some quotes here from Newman that I think bring out the feeling, at least, that I was trying to portray of life writing the agenda and trying to make the most of each opportunity. Newman said this: "Nothing is more difficult than to be disciplined and regular in our religion. It is very easy to be religious by fits and starts and to keep up our feelings by artificial stimulants. But regularity seems to trammel us and we become impatient." He said, "A hallmark of a truly spiritual person is consistency, a carefulness about all things, little and great. The greatest mortification is to do well the ordinary duties of the day. If we would aim at perfection, we must perform well the duties of the day. I do not know anything more difficult, more sobering, so strengthening than the constant aim to go through the ordinary day's work well." So as with many things, Newman was a forerunner of a lot of the spiritual emphases we see today. You know, much of the council was catching up with Newman's thought, his great emphasis on the laity, for one thing. So I think he's a good guide in much of this spirituality that we're trying to develop. I wanted to put together the two ideas that I was working with at the end. That was, I was trying to stress this situational spirituality, which amounts to attentiveness to God throughout the day, which means that we're trying to let life write the agenda, in which we're using the events of the day as the catalyst and the grist for prayer. That's the situational side. And then I was saying, so I want Diane to do more of that and maybe pray at good times throughout the day, just brief prayers that are going to help her. But then the other side of it is to have something structured. The spiritual tradition has been to have a regimen, something fixed that we do, and that's supposed to bring together the two, that's supposed to illumine the situational. I could put the problem this way. I remember a priest, after I gave a talk like this, come out to me and say, you know, in my life, when I go to bed at night, I sort of examine my conscience and I look at how I did with my prayer life. Did I say my prayers? Was I attentive at Mass? And so on. And then I would look at my ministerial work. Was I sensitive to people? And did I show a caring attitude, compassion, and so on? But the idea that the two should fruitfully interact never occurred to him. He was a very bright and good pastor. You could put it this way. Someone might say, well, my regimen is to say the rosary every day. And I'd say, well, does that help you? Well, not discernibly, but it's what I do. But it's what I do. That's my spiritual regimen. So what I'm proposing here in this spirituality is that we look consciously for ways that would bring the two together so that they mutually interact. So if we're going to pick a regimen, like saying the rosary each day or going to Mass 3 times a week or of reading the Scriptures every day or meditating or whatever, we ought to look at 2 criteria. One is whether I can do it most days. In other words, to pick a regimen and then at the end of a month to say I did it twice doesn't help much because we're just going to feel guilty. So we ought to pick something, no matter how busy we are, we can actually do it. And secondly, that it illumines the situational. So it would help us to be alert to God's presence in everyday life. One way I would try to think of picking a regimen, picking a spiritual discipline that we try to do regularly, either daily or weekly or whatever. I know in my own life, my regimen is primarily a mantra meditation. I mentioned that before. I try to do that each day. And I find that if I do it, it makes a difference in my presence to people. So if I remember to pray for you during that mantra meditation, then I will do a better job of interacting and of catching the positive energy you send my way. I will be more attuned to it if I've made that part of my mantra meditation. So it's almost, in that case, discernible. You know, it is, you can almost feel the difference it would make. And I know people who, some people do yoga in the morning and then they spend some time reflecting on what has happened, and then they say, well, I'm more attuned throughout the day to what is happening. So the point is to put the situational and the structured spirituality together so they fruitfully interact. Let me just see if there's questions that up to this point. I haven't really had much time for that. People want to ask me anything or push me in a direction, or yes?
We're all here after lunch.
Yes, I think that what comes out of this is what I might call a Catholic sense of leisure that we would like to develop. A Catholic leisure. The problem, I believe, in our culture is that the qualities we bring to work, like efficiency and productivity, getting things done, worried about the bottom line, sort of a heightened intensity about it all that many jobs demand or raising children demands and so on, gets carried over into what we think of as the leisure time. So the example of this would be going on a vacation and just rushing around. We got to do this and do that and run here and go there and see that. It's like doing the Prado Museum in 2 hours, and we did it. We got through it. It's the same carried over into any of our non-work activities like the Mass. Sort of make it happen, get it done, and get out sort of thing. So I see that as one of the great problems for us is figuring out a way to change gears so that leisure is not work. Work has as its goal productivity. We're trying to get something done. Leisure doesn't. Leisure is an end in itself. It's to have its own inner meaning. It's non-efficient, non-productive in that way. So you could think of ways that you might try to do that. One is take the watch off at Mass. Sometimes we've had our whole congregation do that. Everybody take their watch off today. So periodic, everyone's going like this. That's a symbol of saying, I'm not thinking about time. We're here to worship. It doesn't matter how long it takes. The question is, are we in tune with it? Or going to a museum and look at only 2 paintings in the hour you're going to be there. To spend a half hour with each one, or that's overblown, 15 minutes with 4 of them or something, so that you have time to drink it in and see what it's all about. In our area, I use this example. Go see a minor league baseball game. Go see the Mud Hens instead of driving madly to Detroit to see the Tigers play. Just go out and enjoy it. Do simpler kinds of things. Take vacations that are really recreating. Spend leisure time doing things that renew the spirit. Some people might want to veg out in front of the TV as the best thing to do, or watch soaps or watch primetime television or whatever as a good way to unwind. But the question would be, is it somehow doing us good? So we ought to find leisure that works for us. That's almost contradictory, I guess, but leisure that isn't continuation of work, that's got a whole different feel to it. Maybe put on different clothes or something, or as a signal to ourselves that we're into something else here. Even reading the Bible, we have the traditional way of we call Lectio Divina, I often find myself suggesting that to people instead of saying, well, I'm going to read a chapter a day or something. You read until something captures you, and then you think about it, reflect on it, keep going until it exhausts itself. So you might read one verse a day, or half a verse, or 5 verses, or whatever. But that has a different feel to it, Lectio Divina, than saying, boy, I'm going to read all of Matthew during the first week of Lent, you know. And then you're into productivity.
More work for yourself.
Yeah,
Do it that way.
sure.
You're
Not getting anything out of it. So the great problem I see is work is what dominates us for the most part. It dominates our thought patterns and our mode of interacting and so on, and we carry it over to leisure. So we got to change that. Anybody else want to say anything? Okay, yep.
It's not a question that's grammatically.
My brother David? Yes. My brother David was born with RH factor, 6 years younger than me, never functioned in any normal sense. The only responses I ever saw from him was my father every night would bring home a little piece of chocolate for him. And somehow he had some awareness he liked that chocolate. He couldn't hold his own head up and so on. He lived for 9 years. My note says that he brought out of my parents love and probably gave me a lot of my feeling for life. He's probably one of the reasons that I ended up studying with Ronner, because somehow built into the experience of having a brother like that and watching my mother take care of him, my father gave me sort of what I'd call a sober sense of life. And I remember when I was looking at different theologians as who I wanted to settle down with or study in depth, what finally appealed to me about Ronner was what he called his wintry piety, as opposed to like a springtime, optimistic, upbeat kind of piety. Ronner is a sober realist, and that ended up appealing to me, and I'm sure a lot of that came out of my family experience with my brother. But my point was that my brother, although he never said a word, brought out of my parents a deep love and a selfless giving that was prime example. I draw a lot on my mother's sense of what I call self-acceptance. My mother told me that when my brother was born, up till then everything was fine in her life. She had 2 healthy children and she's on a roll and all. And she told me how at that point it was clear to her she had 2 choices. You're either going to be angry about that or blame yourself or feel guilty, rail against God or kick your feet or be some negative response, or you could accept it and get on with it. And my mother chose to accept it. Ronner says that the key to the spiritual life is self-acceptance. Acceptance. But oh, how difficult that is to achieve. And I saw my mother achieve it, not perfectly, but to a high degree, and it always touched me. There was that hard realism. One of the best things my mother ever said to me, I wanted to go play baseball in the field. All I ever wanted to do was be a Major League Baseball player. And they had to go through one neighborhood to get over to the other neighborhood I was going to play, and there were these tough guys there that were going to beat me up and so on. And I went to my mother with this problem, thinking my mother will get me over there. And my mother said, "Young man, you want to play ball over there? Get yourself over there." Now, no mother can say that these days. They'd feel guilty or something, the kids would get beat up or something. But I thank my mother for that. In a million ways she said that. That's how it is. Life, there's a grittiness about it, and you have to fight your way through it. You want to play ball over there? Get yourself over there. I'm not holding your hand. And geez, I just thank her for that. But I mean, I know you say that to women today, young women raising kids, and they don't like that. It's a negative message to them. I appreciated it. Just one more story while I'm on that about this gritty realism. My mother is 87, still alive. She has horrible osteoporosis and still drives a car and all that. But when she was in her late 70s, early 80s, I took her out to dinner one night, and I noticed she was favoring her arm I think it was her left arm. And I said, what's wrong? She says, well, I got this little pain in there and so on. I said, well, I could see how she, I said, we got to go to a doctor. And she didn't want to, but I took her anyway. And the doctor x-ray says, why heavens, your mother's got a severe fracture of her elbow. I can't understand how she's going on here. You know, and he put it in a thing and like in a soft cast and everything. And as I was going out, the doctor says, hey, your mother's going to need care 24 hours a day, you know. I mean, you got to figure this out. Geez, how am I going to do this, you know, trying to figure this out. So we get home, and I said, well, the doctor said you need care. We got to figure out what to do. And she says, well, let's see. So she went in the house, and she took out a jar of mayonnaise or something and figured out how to open it. She then went into the bathroom and handled that. She says, come on, let's get in the car. She got in the driver's side, backed the car out, drove out and around the block, out onto a busy street, came back in driveway and said, I guess I won't need 24 hours a day care, will I? That was her graphic way of making the point. All of that gives me my existential feel for wintry piety. That's Ronner. That's Ronner in everyday terms. And I know my mother got that fundamental idea from accepting the fact that her third child was RH factor and wouldn't function, and cared for him. You know, it's an extensive answer to that. We were going to do a second topic, weren't we? Which had to do with the question of dealing with change. So I thought of this morning's as being dealing with time, right? And problems of busyness, of half-hearted living, and so on. So now I'm thinking about time. And my protagonist in my short composite vignette I will call Tom. Now Tom is facing the fact that he is going to be retiring soon. And it's anxiety producing for him. He's not sure, well, what is he going to do with himself? He's not sure that he and his wife can actually be together that long in the house. Will she let him just stay there? You know, I remember a friend of mine who Dan would know saying, that he retired and was in a house, and his wife eventually said, look, either you're going out to get a job or I am. One or the other. So this is anxiety producing for Tom. And as he begins to look at this, he thinks back over his career and his life, and he thinks of all the changes he went through. He remembers when he went to college and left the settled and familiar environment of high school and came to the University of Toledo. And here's this, 20,000 people running around and all that. And it was hard for him because it took him a while to find his niche, where he fit and how he was going to handle things. And that was sort of traumatic for him. And he thinks of when he took his first job, the interview, the anxiety around it. Would he be able to measure up, and could he impress people, and would they want to hire him, and so on? Could he find steady work? And then throughout his work career, he worked for 4 different companies. Changed, and each time there was sort of a stress level, and he thought it was a better move, and so on. Sometimes Tom says that throughout his life, he's been married to 5 different women. And they're all named Anne. And he thinks what a different person she was when they were first married, and it was just romantically wonderful, and it was so beautiful. And then he married another wife when the first children came. And boy, she put a lot of attention on those kids. Amazing. And he often felt like, where did he fit into this whole picture? She wasn't that interested in much bed activity either, and that didn't thrill him. So then he had to figure out how to adjust to that. And then when the kids left home, he married another woman, And they tried to figure out how to be a duo again, because they communicated mostly through their kids up till that point. They'd talk to each other about the kids, but there was never talk to one another about them, their relationship. And then he's looking at now another woman by the name of Anne that he's married to as he's moving towards retirement. He's had to learn so many new things. He felt inadequate at work when the whole computer revolution happened and these young guys came in and they were whizzes and they knew all about this stuff and he didn't have a clue. And he had to really fight his way just to get a minimal knowledge till he could sort of pretend like he knew what he was doing and hold his own with these young people. So Tom, when he thinks about his life, it's like one transition after another, one trauma of change after another. He mastered them, but they were always anxiety-producing for him. And it was always a question of uprooting and starting over, and he longed in his heart for just to have solidity, to have continuity, to have something that held together for him. And yet life just kept propelling him in all these changes. Now he's looking at a big one, moving towards retirement. A lot of that for him bears on his religious outlook. He has a feeling that retirement could be positive in terms of giving him more time for prayer and reflection and so on. So I put Tom out there as exemplar of the kind of world we live in and the changes that challenge us. And as I did before, I want to try to analyze that in larger perspectives. And I put it in this way, that we are living through clearly one of the greatest transition periods in the history of the human race. It's really hard to imagine a bigger transition than we have known in this time. Primarily, that's true because it's an actual change of consciousness, the way we think, paralleled, it seems to me, only by a couple of other events in history, that is, the invention of the alphabet and the invention of the printing press. So that the invention of the computer and television, electronic age, it hasn't just made like a little bit of difference. It's changed the way we think, the way we process information, the way we function. Now, the other night, I was unable to turn on the television set in the staff dining room. I tried for 15 minutes to turn that television set on, unsuccessfully. And then I went out and found an expert, one of the students, who turned it on immediately. And it struck me that this is the first time in the history of the world that I think this has happened. That is, where the younger generation knows more than the older generation about something significant. I mean, I could be wrong about that. But that's how it's striking me. Almost always before, I would have taught the young guy how to do something new. Instead of having 5-year-olds program my VCR or something. So that is a change that is momentous, that it is hard to imagine what that all means. What confidence do young people have in a priest who can't turn his television set on? So there's new kinds of questions. And what does it do to have to learn from younger people things about life like that? So that's one way to begin to think about this tremendous transition period in which we live. So I want to detail that in terms of the shifts that have occurred in our own lifetime. We are now in what we'll call a post-colonial period. Columbus, of course, created the modern colonial world. The Western powers dominated everything else. And now we are in a post-colonial world. Cultures have their own way of doing things. We no longer think or can impose our will in every way that we want from a Western perspective on the world. It is a post-denominational world. In other words, the old world was clearly divided into Protestants and Catholics, or Lutherans, Presbyterians, Methodists, Anglicans, and Catholics. That's no longer the breakdown that we find in our society. I'll just tell you a little vignette again on that. There was a young man who worked for us at our university parish. Each year we have a student who gives a year of service to our parish, thus may be given up, in the case of our pharmacy majors, about $60,000 a year for that year, or they give up a year of graduate school, a major commitment. They work with us for very little wages, and they're extremely helpful to us. Well, one young man did this with me. He was a graduate student in history, and his wife was studying to become a doctor. And Paul did a great job. He did a lot of research for me and helped me out and so on. And after 1 year, he wanted to do a second year, so he said, okay. So he then gave a second year of service, and he organized things, helped with our liturgy and everything. And during his second year, he came to me and he said, I got really good news for you. I'm going to go to the seminary. Paul, that's wonderful. You make a wonderful pastor. You go in the seminary. Good. And I'm thinking, does Paul know something I don't know? And so Paul says to me, yeah, would you write a letter of recommendation for me? Paul, I said, all you've done for me, I'd be happy to do whatever I can for you. Paul, by the way, what seminary are you going to? Oh, I'm going to the Lutheran seminary in Columbus. His wife was at an internship in Columbus. That's what it means to live in a post-denominational world. The point of the story is Paul never batted an eye. Paul never said, is that a problem for you? Or he never said, what do you think about it or anything. He's going to Lutheran seminary. In fact, he's just about finished there now. That old institutional loyalties, the old way the world clearly broke up into Catholic, Protestant kind of thing, in the minds of our young people is broken down. I had a wedding not long ago of two people. They were some of our best parishioners, collegians, and they were there for Mass every week, and they were serious about the faith. They were serious about preparing for the wedding. I started talking to them about if they moved to another place. They went in some other city and were looking around, and they didn't find a Catholic church they really liked. And they gave me strong hints that if they couldn't find a good Catholic church in that new town, they would go to some Protestant church that nourished them the way they wanted it. These were the best of our people. That's what it means to be a post-denominational world. The world is more fluid. It creates many difficulties. The world's post-industrial. Many of our people are preparing for different kind of jobs and so on. It's post-Cold War. We're the only superpower now. We've got to figure out what to do with our power in the world. The world is post-patriarchal. And we're still trying to figure out what that means. That means you don't use sexist language at Mass. You invite and encourage with spiritual authors the use of inclusive language for all music printed in this program. That's a post-patriarchal statement. We live in a world, where women want equal opportunities. They make 2/3 for similar work, and they don't like that. And so it's a world in which we're trying to figure out how men and women relate on some basis of equality and not patriarchy. And I suppose it's a negotiable thing. I remember dealing with a young couple there, and we were talking about dividing up domestic chores. Now, most of the young people I deal with talk about equality in all phases. They talk about partnership. They want equality in marriage, and both males and females do that. So I'm talking to this couple, and they're giving me this whole line, and I said to Terry, well, what do you think, how's this domestic chores going to get broken down? She says, oh, I know, realistically, it probably will be more like 75-25, me doing a 75. And Doug pipes up, she said to me, sort of as an aside, you think she'd settle for 12 and a half? So we're like negotiating. We're trying to find out. I mean, what can you do at the work site? I mean, how can we interact? How can males and females interact? What's acceptable behavior? Is there any way to flirt anymore without being accused of sexual abuse? That would be a great loss to the culture, that flirting couldn't go on. We're trying to figure out, how you would do that without getting a lawsuit or something. How our marriage is going to work like this. So we're in all of these areas. What I'm saying is that we're in a post-something, but we don't know what it is. That's the great problem in a way. That's why in my book I use the word postmodern. That's a commonly used word these days, and no one knows what it means, and that's why I like it. We're moving towards a postmodern culture, and that's saying we don't know. So in one sense, that's a change. That's heavy. On the other hand, it's an opportunity. It's sort of fun to figure out how men and women can relate in a post-patriarchal age. It's an interesting question. It's challenging. It's got a zest to figuring it out, how we would relate to one another in a way different from previous generations have done that. So that's this creation of this postmodern world. Now, in a postmodern world, a lot of absolutes break down. One of the forerunners of the postmodern world is the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. And he wrote The Gay Science in about 1881. And in that book, he has the parable of the madman. And in the madman parable, as some of you remember, the madman comes into the marketplace. And he's in this marketplace where people don't believe. And he comes in there and he says, where is God? And they mock him. Where is God? What happened? Did you lose him? Looking for God, are you? They make fun of him. And the madman says, no, I haven't lost him. I'll tell you what has happened. God is dead, and we have killed him. And then the madman says, and now that we killed God, now the earth is unchained from the sun. And now we are passing through a dark and breathless night. And now we don't know up from down. And then he goes on to say that God has been buried in the churches. The churches are the tomb of God, the tombs of God. In other words, they're complicit in this murder of God. That's a powerful kind of statement of postmodernity. In other words, Nietzsche understood, like few others, that when you took away the linchpin of the whole thing, you take away the fundamental belief in God, the prime absolute that holds the whole thing together, you got chaos. Now the earth is unchained from the sun. And of course, in this changing world, that's been a big part of it, this enlightened attack upon the deity. So I'm trying to give, I suppose, a feeling for this breakup. See, the modern world was characterized by optimism. We're going to make the world better. Humans create problems. We're going to solve them. Reason, the Enlightenment. Voltaire said, smash the infamous thing. And by that he meant the church. Smash the infamous thing, the church, because that's getting in our way. That's dehumanizing us. That's stopping progress. Smash the church, and then we humans, we philosophers, can get on to figure out how to make a better world. That was the Enlightenment. And it was optimistic. Reason can solve any problem. And that optimism carried on through the 19th century, and it was part of our U.S. outlook. And then came World War I, and all of that got smashed in Europe. We lost that optimistic mood. And then World War II, and then the literature, like the existentialist literature that came out, pessimistic. Sartre's play, No Exit, Hell is Other People. Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus. Here's how life is. Sisyphus was condemned by the gods to take the rock, put it up to the top of the mountain, only to have it fall down again. Then he had to go down, get it, push it up again, and do that forever. He puts forward Sisyphus as the absurd hero, waiting for Godot. Beckett's play, just waiting. God, what are we waiting for? Not even sure what we're waiting for. God never comes. Godot doesn't come. All of that sort of existential angst that was very typical of Europe. So my point is that when the modern world breaks down, we got troubles. We don't know what to replace it with. And when the linchpin, the absolute that holds it all together is questioned, then you got real chaos. Just to complete that cultural analysis, that in the United States, it wasn't like that. People weren't that much into Sartre and Camus and Beckett and all that stuff. We remained optimistic. Where World War I and World War II in Europe were disasters, for us, they were in some ways triumphs, the victory of democracy over the forces of evil in the world. Our soldiers came back from World War II heroes of having saved the world for democracy. And so it gave us a continuing optimistic spirit here. We can do anything. We can take a man and put him on the moon and bring him back, said President Kennedy. We can create a Peace Corps. We can solve any problem. We will pay any price, bear any burden to solve the problems of the world. And then in 1963, in Dallas, that optimism was punctured. Chaos invaded Camelot. Kennedy's Camelot. Chaos invaded Camelot. And I would submit that nothing's been the same in the U.S. since. And even for our young people here, the assassination of Kennedy is ancient history. They don't know where they were then. Older people remember where we were. I was teaching the 5th grade. All remember where we were when that happened. It was such a decisive and striking event. And then a whole series of things, Vietnam and Watergate and terrorism and random killings, drive-by shootings, all things that just are chaotic, that you can't control, and that are terrible evil forces out there that are bugging us. And it shatters optimism, let's put it that way. It creates a certain darker mood, a somber mood is created in the culture as part of this transition from the modern world. The idea that we can solve any problem, reasoning and sanity. We're sitting here with a racist problem that we haven't been able to solve, and it continues to fester, and we make a little progress, and it seems we go backward, and it just seems intractable. Healthcare, what the heck are we going to do with it? Who's got a plan to work all this out? Interesting thing, a survey of young people, collegians. When they're asked, are they sort of personally optimistic about life, will they do well? The answer is high percentage yes. And if you ask them, how will the economy do? Not well. How will the country go? Not well. The young people are pessimistic. Will Social Security be there for them? High percentage of young people don't think so. So you get this odd ambivalence as we move into through this new age, where people are saying, young people say, I'm personally optimistic they're going to make it despite all this bad stuff that's going on. Now that is not the most sophisticated viewpoint, but it is, I think, represents the ambivalence in the heart of our young people. All of that by way to try to put into context Tom's problems. The anxiety he feels is the anxiety of the age. It's in the world. It's built into the world as we know it. And we have to figure out our ways to manage all of that. In one area, the change seems to me to be complete and overwhelming, and we can name it. And that is, we are in the electronic age. My student said they're going to put on my tombstone, he never adjusted. He never adapted. You know? He's sitting there writing a book on a yellow pad. Do you believe that? He sits there on a yellow pad and writes. We've seen him. Unbelievable. How Neanderthal can you get? No, so there's a divide in the world. It comes out at every wedding that I'm at. Every wedding you see that the world's divided into two kind of people. Very clear. There's some people who are at the wedding who want the music turned down so they can talk. So they can talk. There are others at the wedding who want the music turned up so they can vibrate. So they can get into it. You know? It's a divide. I mean, it's incredible. It's half facetious, but, you know, it does speak to this electronic age, that it's a different world in which we live.
This is the conclusion of side 1. To listen to side 2, fast forward the tape to the end and turn it over.